Study Section 10. Monetary Approach to Balance of Payments. Introduction. The elasticity approach to balance of payment analysis shows that what happens to balance of payment after devaluation depends on the responsiveness of both export and import to devaluation, keeping price level constant. If export respond more to devaluation than import, then devaluation will correct current account problems. If otherwise, then devaluation will worsen current account problems. However, the absorption approach argues that the neglect of the effect of devaluation on national income is inappropriate. This is more important if we think of import and export as important components of national income. Thus, the absorption pay attention to how output and spending react to devaluation. If domestic spending absorption is greater than domestic output, devaluation will worsen rather than improve current account. Mundell-Fleming framework argues that the first two approaches assume that current account is the most important component of balance of payment. Meanwhile, even when devaluation improves current account, it may worsen capital account so much that the overall balance of payment will be in deficit. Thus, the framework warns that we need to take into cognizance the interaction among exchange rate changes, current account and capital account. However, the Mundell-Fleming framework also has many setbacks, such as the assumption of ML condition, ignoring the interaction of stocks and flows and wealth effect. All these approaches assumed that monetary issues are secondary in the balance of payments analysis. However, scholars like Wiltron 1975, Frenkel, and Johnson 1976 argue that balance of payment analysis is a monetary phenomenon. In particular, they argue that balance of payment is an analysis of monetary flow, and therefore any disequilibrium in the system is caused and can be explained by disequilibrium in the stock of money. That is, anytime there exists excess demand for or excess of supply of money, there is tendency for disequilibrium balance of payments. This chapter therefore catches a glimpse at the monetary approach to balance of payment analysis by developing a simple model submitted by Pilbian 2003. The model will later be used to examine the effect of devaluation on the balance of payment under various exchange rate regimes. Objectives. At the end of this chapter, you are expected to be able to do the following. Understand the three basic assumptions upon which the model is built. Recognize the importance of purchasing power parity in the determination of exchange rate. Understand the monetary theory of balance of payments analysis. Demonstrate the monetary approach to exchange rate determination. Recognize the effect of changes in income on balance of payments under various exchange rate regimes. Analyze the effect of changes in the foreign price level on balance of payments under various exchange rate regimes. Conceptualize the key message of the monetary approach to balance of payments analysis. Monetary model of balance of payments analysis. The model was built on three plausible assumptions. There is stable money demand function, there is a vertical or perfectly inelastic aggregate supply function, and there is purchasing power parity PPP. We shall explain each assumption subsequently in what follows. A stable demand function. The demand function comprises a few variables derived from the standard money demand function that is given by where m raised to power d is a nominal money demand, p is domestic general price level, and y is real income. The parameter k measures the responsiveness of money demand to changes in real income. As can be observed, the equation says that money demand is an increasing function of price level and real income. This is because money demand is demand for real money balances, in which case an increase in the general price level reduces real money stock and raises money demand by the same proportion. In the same vein, when income rises, money demand will rise. Of course, this is not new to us given our knowledge of transactional money demand. We write equation 10.1 so that real money demand will be a function of income as presented in equation 10.2. Now, if we assume that money demand is constant and parameter k is fixed at some positive real value, then increase in income should lead to decrease in price level to maintain equilibrium. For instance, if money demand is say 100 and price level is 5 while K is 2. Suppose the initial income level is 10. This brings real money balance to be 20. Now, consider a 100% increase in income. To maintain equilibrium, price level must fall by 50% from 5 to 2.5. Thus, there is a negative relationship between price level and aggregate demand. This negative relationship is demonstrated in figure 10.1, where price level was on the vertical axis and income level on the horizontal axis. The graph shows that as income rises from Y0 to Y1, price must fall from P0 to P1 to maintain equilibrium money demand. The money demand function forms the basis for aggregate demand curve. That is, in this case, aggregate demand is a monetary phenomenon if money supply is held constant and K is fixed at some positive rate value. Increase in income from Y0 to Y1 will require a proportionate fall in price level from P0 to P1. Decrease in price level leads to excess real money balances, and given fixed money supply, aggregate demand will increase. Thus, the movement along the aggregate demand curve is the changes in money supply. Other factors apart from price that affect income will shift the aggregate demand curve parallel to itself. Such factors include change in the money stock, changes in government spending, taxes, and oil price. Suppose money supply rises, holding price level constant, the aggregate demand curve AD will shift to the right from AD0 to AD1 in figure 10.2. If money supply falls, demand will shift from AD0 to AD2, and this decreases income from Y0 to Y2. B. Vertical aggregate supply function. Money supply is derived from the fact that the economy is operating at full employment and therefore factor prices are constant. This is true because at the going wage, demand for labor is equal to supply of labor. Given this situation, any factor that causes price to rise or fall will not lead to a change in income. The reason for this is that when price increases, wages will fully adjust immediately, and the increase in wage tends to increase cost of production. Although wages have increased, the purchasing power remains the same as before, and so income remains the same. This implies that at full employment, aggregate supply is vertical. That is, income will not respond at all to changes in price. One of the factors that can shift aggregate supply, the economy is at the full employment state, is improvement in productivity, perhaps due to intervention, additional knowledge, or new discovery. Any factor that affects productivity of factors and output will increase income. For example, consider new easy and faster way of producing goods and services, the use of computers instead of typewriter, or the use of readers instead of the use of hoes. This will increase income, and at any given price level, aggregate supply curve will shift from Y0 to Y1 as shown in figure 10.3. It can also be the case that there is a decrease in productivity through the abandonment of a factor that can boost output. If this is the case, although the economy will still be operating at full capacity, aggregate supply curve will shift backwards so that income reduces from C. The purchasing power parity PPP. The purchasing power parity implies that when we take a bundle of goods in one country and compare the price of that bundle with an identical bundle sold in another country converted by the exchange rate, the price is the same. That is, exchange rate adjusts in such a way that domestic price is equal to foreign price. Put in another words, PPP says that domestic price is the same thing as the product of exchange rate and foreign price level. Thus, if exchange rate is 1, then one price prevails across country for a bundle of that good. This analysis gives a simple version of PP, and it is given by where ER is exchange rate defined as Naira per dollar. This implies that if exchange rate rises, depreciation holding foreign price constant, domestic price will rise. If exchange rate falls, appreciate, then domestic price will fall. Empirically, the equation says that if a bag of cement costs 1,000 naira in Nigeria, for example, and the same bag of the same quality and size costs $10 in the US, then the exchange rate of naira to dollar is 100. Suppose that the exchange rate rose to 110, The same bag of cement will cost Nigerian citizen 1,100 or cost American citizen $9.1. In this case, cement industry in Nigeria becomes very competitive since there will be a rush to buy Nigerian cement. This increase in demand for Nigerian cement will lead to appreciation of Naira to say 100. Conversely, if exchange rate is below the PPP value, say it was 90, this implies that the US cement will cost Nigerians 900 Naira 90 times 10, while it will cost an American $10.1, 1,000 divided by 90. This will lead to a rush to buy US cement, and this will appreciate dollar against Naira until reducing demand for US cement, and exchange rates respond by depreciating. The process continues until the exchange rate is back at the PPP value of 100 per dollar. Thus, there is a positive relationship between domestic price level and exchange rate. The PPP shows a combination of the domestic price level and exchange rate compatible with PPP given the foreign price level. The slope of the PPP as shown in figure 10.4 is such that if exchange rate rises by 10%, price level will also rise by 10%. Consider a point like A on the graph, that is, point to the left of PPP line. In this case, the exchange rate is overvalued in relation to PPP. Also, point to the right like point B is a case of undervaluation of exchange rate in relation to PPP. The second term is the reserve, which can be increased or decreased by conducting foreign exchange operation FXO. The authorities may decide to raise money stock by purchasing foreign currency, money or bond held by the private agent. This action will increase central bank liabilities by the amount of the bond purchased, but also increases its asset of foreign currency by the amount of reserve. Change in money supply is therefore brought about by changes in deposits and changes in reserves. This is captured in equation 10.5. Thus, a increase of money supply can come through either by an OMO, which will lead to changes in deposit, the D, or FXO, which leads to changes in reserve, the R. Figure 10.5 presents how changes in reserve or deposit affect money supply. At point A0, money supply is composed of deposit and no reserve. Now, suppose that exchange rate is 1, implying that a unit increase in reserve will lead to a unit increase in money supply. If the authorities perform OMO to effect money supply, MS curve will shift by the amount of the increase in the central bank's domestic bond holding. The purchase of bond through OMO affects deposit and so shift the MS curve from 2. Holding reserve constant, money supply is increased from M0 to M1 so that at point C, money supply is equal to initial deposit D, change in deposit the D and reserve, that is. Now, suppose that the authorities decide to increase money stock through the purchase of foreign bond increase reserve. The increase will shift the reserve curve from R0 to R1, thus holding deposit constant, money supply will increase. That is, the combined current account and capital account is given by the decumulation of reserve or reduction in reserve account for balance of payment to be in equilibrium. If reserve is positive, it must be the case that balance of payment is in deficit. To correct for the deficit, reserve has to fall because the authorities will have to purchase home currency with foreign reserve. The above equation therefore says that increase in reserve due to purchase of foreign currency will lead to balance of payment surplus, while decrease in reserve will lead to balance of payments deficit. If the authorities do not intervene in the foreign exchange market, that is, if the authorities embark on floating exchange rate, reserve will not change and balance of payment will be in equilibrium. That is, a current account deficit must be financed by an equivalent capital account inflow so that the balance of payments will be in equilibrium. With this analysis, the effect of various shocks under both fixed and floating exchange rate shall be examined. Figure 10.6 shows the equilibrium balance of payments brought about by the PPP, equilibrium goods market and equilibrium money market. The model is at equilibrium when there is not excess demand for money or excess supply of money. AD is equal to AS. This equilibrium is consistent with price level P0. At this P0, PPP holds in the foreign exchange market so that at P0, the exchange rate is ER0 and the money market is at equilibrium. The money supply M0 is made up of D0 and R0, which is necessarily equal to money demand. The money demand cuts money supply at point where price level is P0 and the level of income compatible with this equilibrium money market is Y0. The position of the money demand is determined by the domestic price level and domestic income level. Hence, equilibrium money market determines equilibrium balance of payments. The effect of devaluation on the balance of payments. Now, suppose the authority intends to devalue their currency, perhaps to make domestic goods competitive in the world market. Foreigners will increase their demand for domestic currency so as to be able to buy the relatively cheaper goods and services. The increase in money demand will lead to upward shift of the MD curve from, in figure 10.7, money demand therefore exceeds money supply. Note that the competitive advantage will lead to increase in export and decrease in import so that overall balance of payments will be in surplus. The continuous inflow of foreign currency due to increase in interest rate will, in order not to allow for this to occur, the authority will intervene by purchasing the foreign currency with domestic money base. The purchase of foreign currency will raise the level of reserve from R0 to R1, and given equation 10.6, money supply will increase, which in turn will raise aggregate demand for domestic goods. Due to this, increased aggregate demand curve will shift to the right from AD0 to AD1. Since this increase did not produce any increase in output, price level has to do the whole adjustment, and so the pressure on price level will require that it moves from P0 to P1, where it is consistent with the PPP. At P1 and M1, money balance will be at equilibrium, and so the competitive advantage created by devaluation appears not to be effective. In the long run, the T% devaluation will lead to equivalent T% increase in price level, leaving output aggregate supply unaffected. This implies that balance of payment surplus generated in the short run peters out. In the long run, what we have established in this simple analysis is that devaluation tends to create transitory short run advantage gain. Now, note that this is the case because the authorities did not raise money in stock through OMO. What will happen if the authorities use OMO instead of buying foreign currency instead of FSO? Increase in OMO will lead to immediate increase in money demand, and since money stock is fixed, income will not increase. Thus, to restore equilibrium, price level has to do the full adjustment by adjusting upwards with no increase in reserve. In this case, the competitive advantage is immediately eliminated by the monetary expansion. The message from this analysis is that exchange rate changes cannot effect permanent change in the balance of payment. Specifically, a devaluation-revaluation causes disequilibrium in the money market, leading to deficit surplus in the BOPs, which contracts until equilibrium is restored in the money market via reserve changes. Monetary approach to exchange rate determination. Recall that demand for money in the home country is given by the money demand in the foreign country. By the same token will be where asterisk denotes foreign. At equilibrium, money demand is equal to money supply in each as given by equation 10.11. M raised to power S is equal to M raised to power D is equal to M. Equilibrium money market in home. M raised to power X asterisk is equal to M raised to power D asterisk is equal to M raised to power asterisk. Equation 10.11. Since M raised to power X is equal to M raised to power D, then we can substitute M raised to power S for M raised to power D in equations 10.9 and 10.10 and then divide domestic money supply by foreign money supply. But P over P asterisk equals ER. Hence, monetary policy under fixed exchange rate regime. Recall that when the authorities pegged exchange rate, if there is excess money supply, the authorities have to buy the excess to avoid depreciation. If there is excess demand for money, the authorities need to sell the currency to avoid appreciation. The authorities buy domestic currency with foreign currency kept in their reserve. Thus, the purchase of domestic currency will result in drawing down reserve. This implies that when there is excess supply, the authorities will have to draw down the reserve to avoid currency depreciation. The authorities sell domestic currency in exchange for foreign currency. Thus, selling domestic currency amounts to increasing reserves. This therefore implies that when there is excess demand, the authorities will have to raise the reserves to avoid currency appreciation. Suppose the authorities embark on monetary expansion by purchasing treasury bond, the use of OMO. This will lead to excess money balances. This means that the exchange rate will depreciate, but since the exchange rate is pegged, the authorities have to buy domestic currency by drawing down the reserve. Figure 10.7 shows how increase in domestic bond holding increases money supply, and this shifts the curve from and domestic bond holding increases from D0 to D1. The immediate effect is that domestic residents have excess real money balances, M1 over P0, an indication that to reduce the excess spending, agents have to increase aggregate demand, and this shifts AD from AD0 to AD1. The increase in aggregate demand will mount pressure on price level to rise and hence exchange rate. Due to the adoption of fixed exchange rate, the P1 that is consistent with R0 is to the left of PPP, an indication that the domestic economy is not competitive. As a result of this, the economy moves the balance of payment to deficit. To maintain equilibrium, exchange rate must be devalued. To prevent devaluation, the authority will purchase domestic currency by drawing down reserve. This is shown in the panel 3 of figure 10.7, where reserve is drawn down from R0 to R1. The drawing down of reserve leads to reduction in money stock, which in turn reduces aggregate spending, and so AD curve shifts back from AD1 to AD0. Due to reduction in transactions, price level falls back from P1 to P0. To that, the economy reverts back to the initial position. This implies that an expansionary monetary policy in the face of fixed exchange rate will lead to an equivalent reduction in reserve and returns the money stock to its original position. Thus, in the monetary sense, balance of payments deficit under expansionary monetary stance is merely a temporary and self-correcting phenomenon. Monetary policy under floating exchange rate regime. Under the floating exchange rate, the monetary approach maintains that there is nothing like balance of payment deficit or surplus because the economy will be self-correcting. When the authorities expand money supply through the purchase of treasury bond using OMO, money supply increases and this leads to excess money in the system. That is, spending agents are having more money at their disposal and as a result, they increase that spending. This will then increase aggregate demand by shifting AD curve from AD0 to AD1. Since the economy is operating at full employment, there will be excess demand for goods and services, which will then be offset by import. Increase in import will lead to depreciation, while excess demand will mount pressure on price level. The pressure on price and increase in imports will lead to depreciation of exchange rate. With floating exchange rate policy, exchange rate will increase from ER0 to ER1. The depreciation will lead to increase in demand for domestic currency and this will shift M raised to power D from to because output remain the same. The economy moves along this aggregate supply curve until where M1 is just equal to R0 and P1 is equal to ER1P asterisk. The case of floating exchange rate provides a clear contrast to the fixed exchange rate. Under fixed exchange rate, an expansionary OMO leads to disequilibrium in the money market and this is resolved by the authorities. Under floating exchange rate regime, an expansionary OMO leads to a depreciation of the exchange rate and the rise in price level. Under fixed exchange rate regime, the authorities can no longer maintain independent control of the money supply and money supply returns to its original level due to the fall in the international reserve held by the authorities. Under floating exchange rate, they can determine the amount of the money in demand brought about by changes in the domestic price level and exchange rate. Changes in income under fixed exchange rate. Within the context of monetary approach, an increase in income will affect balance of payment through money demand. Suppose that domestic income rises perhaps due to innovation, aggregate supply curve would shift from AS0 to AS1. Due to this increase in income, money demand will also increase and this is indicated by the shift from to at. Money demand exceeds money supply M0. The spending agent therefore reduces spending on both domestic and foreign goods. This then leads to reduction in price level from P0 to P1. Reduction in price level, holding exchange rate constant implies that domestic goods is cheaper and hence gains competitive advantage. This later leads to balance of payment surplus. The surplus will trigger appreciation and so the authorities have to intervene to prevent this to happen. They do this by purchasing foreign currency with the newly created money. This will then increase reserve from R0 to R1 and hence domestic money stock from M0 to M1. This will then shift aggregate demand from AD0 to AD1, mounting pressure on the price level to rise and this increase in price level continues until condition for PPP is satisfied as shown by the upper arrow. Changes in income under floating exchange rate. Under the floating exchange rate, increase in income influences money demand and have a resultant effect on exchange rate. An increase in income will generate increase in demand for money. The increase in income will lead to decrease in price level and hence decrease in price level Y from P0 to P1 as shown in figure 10.10. As price level falls, domestic economy becomes more competitive and this leads to high demand for domestic goods, which in turn leads to appreciation of domestic currency to maintain PPP. Thus, exchange rate falls from ER0 to ER1. In the long run, there will be increase in real money balances, M0 over P1 greater than M0 over P0. The reason is that increase in income will lead to increase in money demand. Why? Because the fall in domestic price level leading to less demand for money is quickly offset by the rise in money demand due to increase in income. The low demand cancels out high money demand, leaving M/D curve at MD0. Suppose there is an increase in the foreign price level. Ordinarily, this will cause exchange rate to appreciate, equation 14. However, under fixed exchange rate, the effect must be taken care of by changes in money supply and demand. The effect is demonstrated in figure 10.11. Increase in foreign price will rotate the PPP line inward. This is so because increase in foreign price means domestic products are cheaper, and this makes the domestic economy competitive in the world market. Point to the left of PPP. To maintain PPP, when exchange rate is fixed, domestic price has to rise from P0 to P1. As the economy becomes more competitive, demand for domestic currency rises, and this shifts M/D curve from 2. This will then lead to balance of price falls. In particular, a country that pegs its exchange rate should also expect imported inflation or deflation depending on the increase in foreign price level or decrease in foreign price level. The next message proceeds from the first one, and this is that if a country adopts pegged exchange rate and there is inflation in the foreign country, the country must adjust its money supply in line with changes in foreign money supply, thereby losing control over its monetary policy, no monetary independence. Specifically, a pegged exchange rate economy is at the mercy of the monetary policy of the foreign trading partner. Changes in foreign price level under floating exchange rate regime. When a country is operating under floating exchange rate, an increase in foreign price will lead to a leftward rotation of the PPP, thereby creating a competitive advantage. The competitive advantage will be eliminated by appreciation of currency as shown in figure 10.12, where AR increases from AR0 to AR1 in order to maintain PPP at the existing price level. That is, under floating exchange rate, the domestic price level and aggregate demand are left unaffected by foreign price shock. Why is this so? Increase in foreign price level will first lead to increase in demand for domestic good, but as this continues, domestic currency will appreciate, thereby offsetting the competitive advantage. The increase in exchange rate will fully absorb the effect and leave the system money supply, money demand, aggregate supply, and price level unaffected. Thus, under floating exchange rate, the authorities gain supremacy over their monetary stance, independent monetary policy. This is quite in contrast with the imported inflation generated by the fixed exchange rate regime. However, the level of independence gained under the floating exchange depends, importantly, on the rate with which exchange rate can adjust in line with PPP. Study section summary. The feature of monetary approach to balance of payments analysis is that money market disequilibrium is a crucial factor that leads to balance of payments disequilibrium. The decision of the private agent centers on the level of their money balances. If output is fixed, then aggregate spending behavior depends on real money balances rather than income. This is so because agents tend to first decide the amount of money to hold as cash for expenditure purpose. Thus, decision about the use of money matters, not decision about expenditure. The central message of the monetary approach is that money demand is a stable function of relatively few variables. However, it is not a function of price elasticities of import and exports. By implication, in a fixed exchange rate regime, the authorities have to accept loss of control over their domestic monetary policy as the price paid to fix their exchange. An attempt to expand the domestic monetary policy under fixed exchange rate will lead to balance of payments deficit and the need to purchase back the currency on the foreign exchange market. Under fixed exchange rate, the authorities run the risk of imported inflation or deflation depending on whether foreign price rises or falls. Under floating exchange rate regime, the authorities can exercise their monetary independence because the changes in foreign price level are self-correcting through appreciation. Also, the economy will also avoid imported inflation. Meanwhile, the extent to which this is possible depends on the rate of adjustment to PPP. This is the end of Studies Section 10. Thanks for listening.